Hi, everyone. Welcome to Shared Broadcast 6. Lizzie is going to start us off with her quote this week. Go for it.
Hello. So the quote I chose was from the Smith article on page 27. In reflecting on this, I remember this as my first really adult thinking, creating my own meaning and truth from the multitude of authoritative voices, not making a dialectical either-or choice. The reason I chose this is because in all of my coursework, in this program and in my previous grad program, I've always struggled with defining my own perspective, especially when it came to counseling theories, or in this case, philosophy. In fact, I've been called out on it by other students before, that I don't necessarily reflect directly on myself, and I always, I tend to talk more about my family and my kids and outside stuff. So I talk too much about my kids or family. I reflect based on my roles with them or my work, but not truly reflecting on myself or my own beliefs. And I chose this quote because not only have I experienced what Smith was describing, but I'm still in the odd position of not being truly introspective, not truly reflecting as I think I should. And instead, I feel like I mirror the information I learn from the quote-unquote authoritative voices rather than questioning or making my own conclusions. I still do that now. Were you going to say something?
Well, I just think that, I don't know, I really struggle with the whole introspection thing. Does it have to be necessarily into like your own self? Is that what it is as definition? Because to me, I feel like when you're making connections and you're making reflections and you are relating it to something that is in your world,
Mm-hmm.
to me, it doesn't seem like it's that. It doesn't seem, it seems like it's like, tomato.
Right. Well, see, that's how I am. That's how I think, but then I get criticized for that, and it's, yeah. So, yeah, I'm one of those people who I see my role in its, I see it as a complete role as wife, mother, sister, daughter, that whole spiel, and so I relate myself to those other things, and my philosophies and my beliefs are surrounding them.
Yeah.
Those
are, it's your
identity by them. They're my foundation, know. So, but then students and teachers will always come back and say, "Okay, Lizzie, but what about you?" And then I freeze, and I'm like, "What do you mean? What about me?" So.
Yeah.
So.
What about you?
What about me?
A little bit more self-centered, Lizzie.
I know, huh? In explaining its importance to adult educators and the impacts of the design and implementation, because of the future assignment, we are asked to figure out our own educational philosophy, where we stand. Again, I'm having issues with this idea of defining my perspective. And I feel like the other readings sort of supported my ambiguity. So when I was reading the other articles, they all said the same thing. You don't just choose one. There are many. And so, like in the Price article, which comes first, philosophy or practice? Do we determine our philosophy of education best expresses our principles and beliefs, then seek to operationalize that philosophy in our practice, or do we extrapolate our theories and philosophical views from the realities of what works in practice? And then Tisdale and Taylor, practitioners in the field, actually straddle several orientations, each emerging to the fore as the teaching context shifts and changes. And so I was looking at multiple philosophies. And I'm like, I need to delve into these deeper to figure these out more. And then even the text on page 164 notes that no one person falls under any singular approach. So that many writers combine approaches, however they're relevant. So for me, what I like to learn, in my last paper, I explored the International Council for Adult Education, which was initiated by a humanist, wanting to give each person the opportunity to grow into their full potential. But the whole mission of the ICAE was based around advocacy and the human right of education, which is slightly different philosophical angle. So that sort of showed the difference between the philosophy and the practice of the educator. And so my personal next steps is to explore this further, because in our next paper, we have to come up with our personal philosophy. And I've got like 4 of them so far, So.
I'm wondering, this goes back to, I don't know what shared broadcast we were talking. I think it was one when we were talking about the history of adult education and how I like zeroed in on one thing, and I really chose that, and then you went for the whole broader picture.
Broad thing, yeah.
And we were talking about that. Or maybe it was before or after, but you were like, yeah, I kind of take like the big the big idea, and I was like, well, I don't do that. And here we are, we're about to do the same thing. Where you're living in ambiguity and a mixture of the two, and I'm gonna say this is my philosophy and that sort of thing. So that's
good. Maybe you can help me focus.
I don't know. Let's see. Okay, well, with that, I can start mine. Let me just grab my notes. So the article that I chose to draw from the most, maybe just because I think that it just kind of logically went along with my brain really well, was the Tisdale and Taylor article, Adult Education Philosophy Informs Practice. The quote that I chose was actually in the beginning, and it says, knowing one's educational philosophy and how it relates to our practice and those beliefs of adult learners in our classrooms can better help negotiate the everyday realities of life with the adult learners. And to me, the reason why that stuck with me, and mostly because kind of the whole idea of the article went on to kind of state that people have different philosophies, and the reason why people might learn differently or not see eye to eye on some sort of educational philosophy or how to teach something or how really necessarily it should be taught might boil down to their educational philosophy and their difference in educational philosophy. So the reason why that kind of hit me is because I really hadn't thought about educational philosophy as being the core reason why people might not see eye to eye, or especially like teachers working together, why, we might approach a subject differently. Or even just with students, how they I might have an expectation and a student's expectation doesn't meet mine. And what they're willing to take away doesn't match what I think that they should be willing to take away.
Right.
And I kind of always boiled that down to value in education. Like, oh, they just don't value education as much as I do. And that's very elitist and rude of me to now say, but I think that it's almost better, like a better spin on it is to think of it as them, their philosophy, their take on education is different than mine. I think it's a way more open way to think about it. And it really did gave me an aha moment for the most part when I was reading this article. But then the Smith article, because that was actually the first thing that I read, when I was reading this, I was like, wow, this just sounds like a journal excerpt. And
yeah,
published.
Basically.
That's neat. So I was thinking about that, and then I was kind of applying that whole idea, the introspection to myself. I'm kind of glad that I read that first, because then I was able to kind of think about these readings through that lens. And I was thinking, like, it's really different how my educational philosophy in teaching is different than my educational philosophy as a learner. And so I kind of dove into that a little bit just to kind of try and apply, and because I was really trying to like identify with some of these philosophies. The more and more, like when I think about my teaching philosophy, I think I strive to be a critical humanist, and I think the quote that I liked from that section describing it is that is that the critical humanist category would be where I would be facilitating learning.
Right.
I would know in reality, so I'd be more of a facilitator. I lost my part on my notes, but that's fine. So I think that's what I strive for. But I think that really I'm my roots as a teacher are really rooted into practicing liberalism. I think that goes back to my personality type of just because I think I struggle with releasing control in my classroom.
Okay. Yeah.
But I also think, and I don't want to like harp on myself for that. I also think that my age group, and maybe this is a difference between secondary and adult education, is that secondary probably still needs some of that structure. And some of that mothering, I guess. Especially like freshmen, if you let them do whatever they want, they're adorable, but they're just still gonna be,
right. And do you think it has something to do with the subject matter too?
Yeah, I do think that math in general is so linear that it's not, it doesn't lend itself to the social emotional piece. It doesn't lend itself to really the discovery piece. Like there is a lot you can do with problem solving, but it's still rooted in the structure of math. So there could be that too. So then I got to thinking about how I like to learn, which I've had a whole year experience being a graduate student. And I do think that I like to have the humanist aspect, but then especially like having more autonomy, having more choice, having more some personality in my what I'm doing. I guess I like that I've been able to apply whatever assignment I am to whatever, like in this last one, we got to choose the organization that we focused on, and hopefully chose something that would eventually impact our lives in the future so that there's some buy-in. But I also, something that I didn't really expect to also, really come about is the whole relational piece. And when I was reading about the theories that were more relational, the feminist humanist theory or philosophy was one that really stuck with me. I know that that's something I actually struggle with as an educator to foster in my classroom. I do make relationships with my students more individually, but like kind of having this culture of mothering, that's what it kind of sounded like to me. Nurturing. I know that I don't foster that as much as I like to experience as a student. Because I find that the classes that I've really enjoyed the most have had almost like, how did I describe it in my notes? It's just they have like a whole entire, like it's just a strong community of learners that I think that you get kind of like when you do these videos, making connections that way, or even some of the posts or intro pieces that we have to do are a little bit more personal about who we are, and what does that mean for our learning. So so that's who I am as a learner. I guess I like to make more relations with my professor, my teacher, or my colleagues. So there's me being a little bit more specific and trying to apply. So how does this apply to adult educators? Well, for me, I was just kind of looking short term. I know our Aims of Adult Education research paper is going to talk about our philosophy, which you also talked about as well. I was wondering, and maybe if our professor's listening, does it need to be this journalistic or reflective piece like the Smith article? Is that what we're striving for, for that piece or for that paper? So so I would be interested to know that. But then I also just thought that the examples and the structure of a lot of our readings in our text will help us be good resources for that article. And how I would like to dive deeper. So diving deeper, going further, I really want to kind of analyze the differences between my teaching philosophy and my learning philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like how do they work together and how are they disconnected? And mostly I just reading this text, it made me wonder why I don't always teach why don't I teach like I like to be taught, if that makes sense. You know, if I know that I like this relational piece, why don't I try and foster it more in my classroom? And then when I start working with adult learners, this is just kind of a wonderment question for myself. When I do start working with adult learners, will I be able to use the more humanistic philosophy? Or I'm a little worried that I'm just going to rely on my previous experience. You know, old dog, old tricks.
Branch out in little bits, like
a little bit.
Water.
Yeah.
Put your toes in the water a little bit.
But I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting reading. It was a good opportunity to think about myself as a learner. I think I still am pretty green with philosophy in general and getting to know these philosophies. So that will also be something that I'll have to dive in deeper.
Yeah, so I need to clarify some of these a little bit more, I think. Because it's like the book introduced some the philosophy stuff, and then the articles introduced them a different way, and I'm like, you know.
And Mezirow, like I feel like I've learned a lot more about his transformative learning piece, but I was having trouble relating that to the critical humanist theory. So
his critical reflection.
Yeah, well, so this article said called it critical humanist.
Yeah, they call it.
So I was having trouble getting.
They mentioned Mezirow.
So that's something I want to hash out, but
yeah, because I think that's one of the many that I actually go forward to because I like Mezirow.
Yeah,
I like the idea of critical reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I like that Smith article, even though it was like a very long journal entry.
Yeah, oh yeah, it was.
But it was her ability to actually self-reflect and then move forward with a different perspective from her own reflection.
Yeah.
And that's not something I ever do. So I was like, oh, I need to work on this a little bit more. And like when you said, why do you teach differently than how you learn? That's a good question. But at the same time, I'm one of those people where my husband constantly tells me not everybody thinks like I do.
Yeah.
I'm like, why don't they just do this? Well, because not everybody thinks like you do. So in my case, it would be a need to practice a different philosophy than how I learn and not assume that everybody learns how I learn.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think that's a big thing that, we educators try and do, especially in secondary, is that you have to teach your population. Like if you're not teaching your population, then you're not doing anybody any favors.
Right.
So getting to know your students, building I said that building a relationship with my students is one of my weaker parts. I'm more talking about as a whole classroom culture. But I take time to build individual relationships with my students to get to know who they are so that I can better teach them. Because to me, if you're doing teaching strategies that aren't going to work, then there's no point in teaching at all. So, I don't know.
Nope, that totally makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Lizzie, do you have anything to add for this week? We're kind of hitting our time.
Nope, I don't think I have anything to add. I'm stressing over that annotated bibliography due next week. So I'm thinking about that and the aims of the educational philosophy. So
well, we have quite the work ahead of us. Everybody does.
Yes.
Well, at that rate, then I will close up shop. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.